Hi everybody. So I am starting with this sketch, which is my perspective city scene. That's a very futuristic looking building. So I've got enough shading to tell how these things are formed, but this isn't going to be something that I immediately color. One, it's already got a lot of shading to it, and although that tells me that the light source is coming from this direction, it doesn't really help me to be able to get the right accurate colors. So it's also not the size that I want it to be. So when you're an assignment, I've given you a very specific size that I would like your final project to be. And so you have a couple choices. One, you can just choose a selection of this picture and make it the exact same size that it is and just trace or color a certain section of this piece that you can cut out and mount on another board. I obviously expect you to at least trace it onto some thicker paper because this is copy paper, and to do your actual project you're going to want it to be on Bristol board or cardstock. So the other part is that I made some copies of this picture. So you can either take a picture of it and really head on as flat as you possibly can and print it in different sizes, or you can scan it if you have a scanner and print it in different sizes, or you can take it to a copier. This one right here is printed in 75%, and that is about the right size if you used the whole piece of 11 by 17 paper to go for our picture. So this is the one that I'm going to be tracing because I really want to include this tower and some of the more detailed pieces that I have in this picture. But before I start that, I do want to do some tests with different colors. So what I mean by that is I'm going to take my markers and my colored pencils and I'm going to experiment with what colors I think would look best. So I have a couple different options. And so this is how big this would be if I printed it at 50%. This is how big it is printing it at 33%, and this is how big it is printing it at 25%. Personally, this is a little small for me to see the details and the colors, so I'm going to do some tests on this one right here, and I'm going to time lapse to record those tests so you can see my progress before I move on to my big piece and tracing. So before I even start trying to make some color samples, I need to look at some pictures and references. I used both a night image and a day image of futuristic cities to start laying out some colors. I keep track of what number each color that I'm going to use is so that I can really make sure I'm using the right colors, as well as crossing out the ones I put back into my package. And essentially I wanted to test out these colors. I'm not worrying too much about blending techniques or getting too specific into exactly how the sky is going to look, because I'm also doing this on copy paper. I'm more concerned about what the colors of the buildings look like and kind of general layout of what I like the picture to look like. And although I enjoyed the pictures of jewel tone cities, I thought with marker and colored pencil, I wasn't going to get the highlight that I would have liked to get to make those things glow and make it feel more like it was night. And I didn't think that was the strength of these materials. So I went ahead and went with the daytime picture, and I liked this one a lot better after I completed it. I made a lot more kind of realistic colored buildings and a few more futuristic tinted buildings, and I really liked that second one best. So then I went ahead and traced my image. I did this on an incline, which you can't tell in this photo, which is why I had to tape the glowing box, the light box, to the table. And I also had to tape the paper that I was tracing on to the paper I was tracing from, because I like to move around a lot. You'll notice that when we get to painting as well. So I'm moving around this picture and I'm still using a straight edge, because you drew this with a ruler, and tracing it with a ruler makes it a lot easier. If you happen to have a see-through ruler of some kind, it is very helpful. When I'm tracing, I'm often shutting off the light box so that I can look at what I've traced and what I haven't traced. And I shut all the lights in the room off so that I was really dependent on being able to see all of the individual lines really clearly through the paper. You can see that this under drawing was really understandable as I'm trying to trace it, and it was about an hour to trace the whole thing. You can see here that I continue to use the piece of paper that I swatched with as I continue to work on the actual drawing. And I use marker first to really lay down those colors in big blocks. I like the sky being a really strong blue and a light color that gets darker toward the top and really kind of hazy when you get to the horizon. Some of those futuristic cities were kind of floating in air, and I wanted to create that kind of sensation at the bottom. The other side I blended a little differently, trying to get that harsh line with the top to be not as visible, and so I also used a few different kinds of markers, all of them alcohol-based markers. And I worked on that blend as much as I could. I'm working on the smooth side of watercolor paper, so it is going to hold a lot of liquid when I use the markers, but it's not going to be as easy to blend as it would on marker paper. I took the lighter, peachier, and pinky colors to fill in a lot of the buildings, and then used a blender and some darker colors to achieve shadows. I really want to lay in all my foundation colors, all of my foundation shadows, and general shaping all across this piece before I start trying to do some general detail. Now, there is quite a bit of detail in that some of the sweeping buildings and some of the little perspective detail bits. So I'm careful to work around those and include those as I'm laying in these colors. I'm keeping a relatively restricted palette here, mostly blue and tan, and a little bit of gray and purple as accent colors. And I'm doing that to keep everything a little bit more simple. And then there's a range in those browns, blues, purples, and grays that I use to help create depth in each of those buildings. Here now you can see what I was talking about, that I like to move the page around, and I like to do that a lot. And as I'm working with the marker, it really helps to blend because your sideways strokes are much easier, or your vertical strokes are much easier to do than sideways strokes necessarily. So often I'm moving the paper to make the way that I'm moving my pencil or the way that I'm moving those markers most comfortable for me. I'm also, now I swatched quite a few of my colored pencils, and I'm coming back in with colored pencils to add detail and change the way that some of these colors blend. So I worked with the sky to make that blend a little bit smoother, and I'm continuing to add detail. I'm not just using colored pencil though. I switch back and forth to adding a little bit of marker in some places, and I'm wanting to add the purple in this triangular building and in the building in the center in a more subtle way than I did in the building to the back right, which is also purple. So that's why I'm leaning more on the colored pencil for these particular buildings and keeping my colored pencils nice and sharp with a pencil sharpener. The shadow colors that I'm using for all of the buildings, I'm using a dark red, a dark purple, a dark blue, and a dark gray. All of those colors together make for a really nice combination, and I can change those up. I also have a really dark brown for some of the peach buildings. As you can see, I added detail with markers, and everywhere I could, remembering to add perspective depth, like in windows or other types of things. Once I get in all the general colors laid in, I'm starting to add depth. So what I mean by that is I'm starting to darken all of the places at the bottom that start to disappear. And I'm also using mineral spirits to kind of soften out and really get the wax of those pencils to be more opaque. I wanted to make some of that texture disappear. You can see, especially in some of those lower areas, after I had put the pencil down, you just couldn't see all of the thick color that was there. It was really kind of diluted by the texture of the paper and the texture of the way the colored pencil laid down. So using the solvent was really helpful, and you can see anytime I'm using that blending stump, like here, that is me just kind of blending out that colored pencil. So it gets darker and darker in a bunch of different colors, but I'm not adding anything new. I'm just making the colored pencil
a little bit smoother. I also used a gray marker to add in all this window detail to all these buildings and really flesh out the idea that these buildings are dynamic and have lots of stuff to them. A lot of this was just tiny little marks with a marker, some of them having more depth, some of them using colored pencils to give it more depth. And I continued to go ahead and do all of these little details as much as I could. I wanted to make really sharp details with my colored pencils, and I also came back in with this white colored pencil and really popped up highlights on those pieces. Last, but I guess kind of least, I grabbed some soft pastel and added some shadowing in some places. Although some of it got very dark and I didn't like it, I was able to use an eraser to pull back some of those pieces before finally cutting my page to be in the scale I needed it to be. I taped these two rulers and double checked that they were the correct scale just for demonstration purposes so that you could see what I was doing. Then I'm taking these two different rulers and I'm drawing out the actual picture size that it'll be. As you can see, I said that 75% would be almost the right size, and it is almost the correct size. It is just a little bit too tall, and so I cut that excess off, transferred my piece by gluing it on, and added all the other additional pieces that are needed for the rendering. A 6-foot figure in the 3/8 inch scale, all of the dimensions, and then filled out the title block. And that is the whole project.